Hey, yo, welcome to the Sixers Talk podcast. So glad you could join us here. Danny Pommells, along with Noah Levick, our NBC Sports Philadelphia.com writer extraordinaire, always on the beat, doing his thing. And Ben Barry, our producer in the cut, making this all happen. So glad you could join us. The Sixers with another dub, still sitting in sixth place in the Eastern Conference, but 2.5 games above that play-in game. So the momentum is headed in the right direction. 2 games out of first place, where the the Miami Heat are now in first place, knocking the Chicago Bulls down a notch. Noah, the Sixers get this W against a shorthanded Pelican squad. They were without 3 key players in Shake Milton, Danny Green, and Seth Curry, but we did see the return of Matisse Thybulle, which we'll get into. We'll get into these rumors with James Harden and what might happen with him and Brooklyn as it relates to the 76ers. But no better place to start than with Joel Embiid. Once again, it felt to me, a casual performance for him where he just poured it in once again, joining a list of players like Karl Malone, Bob McAdoo, Wilt Chamberlain, Anthony Davis, of guys who have scored 38 or more points, got 10 or more rebounds in 4 straight games. Taking it all in, Noah, once again, I think the casualness of his points, 18 in the first half, which didn't quite seem like it, that really struck me here in this game against the Pelicans, against a game opponent in Willie Hernan-Gomez and the New Orleans team.
Right. This brought back recent memories of Mo Bamba's career night. Willie Hernan-Gomez, also not renowned as a three-point shooter, knocked one down in the first quarter and finished with a career best 29. So tip of the cap to him. But to me, what stands out from Joel Embiid's night is the comment before the game from Willie Green, the Pelicans' first-year head coach and former Sixer, who was asked just what are the keys to guarding Embiid, and he joked, "Don't let him catch the ball." And
excellent.
Obviously, a humorous comment and something with a lot of truth into it. Just outside of that, I'm not really sure there are any great answers these days to even containing Embiid. 38 plus in 4 straight games is just very difficult to wrap your head around. And to be honest, his first half was subpar by his very high standards. Doc Rivers even noted post-game that at halftime, Embiid put his hand up in the locker room and said, look, I need to be better defensively. And, of course, he set the tone in the third quarter, led the Sixers charge, and allowed them to rush aside what was a pretty poor first half across the board and carried them to this victory, along with Tobias Harris, who gave the Sixers 33 points and 11 boards last night, which was an excellent contribution on his part and important because the Sixers outside of those 2 were missing a lot of shots and the half-court offense was tentative, and it just was difficult to see how the team was going to score when those 2 were not on the floor. But anything related to Joel Embiid, you felt pretty confident, and I'm sure if you're Willie Green, you didn't feel so great when Embiid had the ball in his hands.
12 of 24 from the floor, 18 of 20 from the free throw line, and didn't hit a three-pointer. So that might have pushed him, over the 40-point mark had one of those fallen. It's interesting because I kind of harped on the point that he took 32 shots and was 16 of 32 in the Sixers' last game. Yet here he is with the efficiency and the trips to the line, 12 of 24, 18 of 20, as I mentioned. And it's just a pleasure to see him go about his business and the way he thinks the game, as we alluded to and talked about last time, with him putting, Furkan Korkmaz on his side. So he would be the release valve for him on if the double team came, or he was able to make that pass to Furkan to the corner that we talked about in the last podcast. You bring in Tobias Harris into the conversation, and just really the type of game you want to see him play as Embiid's Robin to his Batman. And when they play games like, it's a shame that it has to be in a game where the Pelicans didn't have Brandon Ingram and Josh Hart and Devontae Graham and Jonas Valanciunas, but you'll take it as far as it goes with the momentum of this team and how they're developing and growing. Because we'll talk about Tobias's numbers in a moment, but I really think that your point about Embiid pointing the finger at himself at halftime and saying, I have to do better, and actually going out and doing it, just the leadership that and the growth that we've seen from him, particularly when he's, trying to lead by example and by his words. So he walks it like he talks it. He's out there, demonstrating the way to get it done. And on top of that, he's egging the crowd on a little bit, like this is what you wanted to come see type of thing, which you talked about in your 3 observations, Noah. So here, starting a 5-game homestand the right way, I would implore people to get down to the arena and enjoy some of this, because he's continually in conversations with Wilt Chamberlain. Like this isn't a normal thing for people to be witnessing. So I just encourage people, if this turns out to be his MVP season, come down here and get to enjoy some of this in person.
Absolutely. I figure the game Thursday night against the Lakers will be a little more packed, a little more of a circus atmosphere.
Anthony Davis returns.
Anthony Davis is back, and the Lakers beat the Nets, I believe, last night. Yep. But last night's Sixers game, there was a sleepy vibe overall to start, and Embiid was not exempt from that. And it wasn't a packed, raucous house, but I think once he got flowing and once the Sixers started making that third quarter push, a lot of energy back in that arena. And I think there was that collective recognition that we're lucky to watch this special talent who's playing his best basketball ever. So yeah, this is an important stretch, as we've noted, for the Sixers, their longest homestand of the season. And it's big that they started it off with a win, because in all honesty, this would have been a bad loss. And this was a New Orleans team without 4 usual starters, and that was giving heavy rotation minutes to rookies and players like Gary Clark, who was briefly a Sixer last year, and it just did not have the strongest roster. So big that the Sixers at least found a way to pull out the win and avoided one of these disheartening home losses that have been rather frequent, in the first half of this season.
Yeah, just their 11th home win, Noah, and we can't get into all the fun stuff without talking about that, because they were down 8 at halftime. They looked like they didn't have the same energy and focus that the Pelicans came out with, getting outworked and out-hustled and like second chance points and 50-50 balls. As Daryl Morey said, there is a giant Ben Simmons size hole in this roster. Obviously, he was a huge part of their defensive effort around the perimeter, or just the team in general. He was employed in the transition defense, and really helps them in a myriad of ways. So what do you think it is about these games where they just don't quite seem to be at the level as the opposing team? Sure, you got all these guys who don't normally get playing time, playing with house money, as they say, who are really, energetic and whatnot. But the Pelicans were coming off a back-to-back. Or playing the second game of a back-to-back, and the Sixers here at home just didn't quite have that oomph.
Indeed, I think there were a couple of plays that epitomized that, with Jose Alvarado, the Pelicans generously listed at 6 foot starting point guard for this game.
Great story, by the way, for him.
Mm-hmm. Namesake of a certain unpredictable Phillies reliever, but he came up from behind on Tyrese Maxey this one play, and the whole arena was almost shouting at Maxey like, he's coming up behind you.
Yeah, watch your back, watch your back.
None of the Sixers on the floor told him that, because he swiped the ball. And then later in the first half, Embiid and Alvarado had a jump ball. Of course, Embiid won it because he's 14 inches taller or whatever, but the Pelicans came out with possession, threw the ball down the floor, and Hernangomez gets an and one layup. So 2 plays that no doubt signify a lack of intensity, a lack of hustle, lack of some of those just effort-based intangibles. And I think the bottom line for the Sixers is they're not a good enough team to get away with being deficient in those qualities. And one aspect of that last night is, okay, the Sixers were more sloppy than usual in the first half. I think had 8 or 9 turnovers. And this is just not a team that forces many turnovers without Ben Simmons. Like they're middle of the pack as opposed to last year, being third in defensive turnover percentage per cleaning the glass. So that's just an indication that if the Sixers are sloppy, then they're going to be conceding a lot of possessions to the other team. If the effort's not there and their rebounding is even worse than usual, that's going to be a further possession disparity. So it's something where the team just does not have a huge margin of error these days. And that's even the case against like shorthanded sub 500 opponents. So credit to them for turning it around. But I think just they can't afford to not start games fully locked in. That's just the reality of what this team is.
Yeah, a Lakers squad that is getting healthier with the return of Anthony Davis will be a test for the Sixers team. Although the Lakers don't have the stellar record to reflect, what this roster looks like. I mean, currently the Lakers sit at 8th in the Western Conference at 24 up and 24 down. But the feather in the Sixers cap right now seems to be, hopefully Tobias Harris can carry over his great play from this game against the Pelicans into that game Thursday against the Lakers. 39 minutes. The guy hit all 3 of his 3-pointers, all 4 of his free throws. He goes 13 of 19, 11 boards, and 33 points. I mean, you can't expect him to contribute that on a regular basis by any means. He's more of a 20-point per game scorer, if a notch below that this season. But here in this game, he seemed to have it going on and was everything the Sixers needed to go with Embiid, where the rest of the roster didn't quite have that momentum. I think Tyrese Maxey got into double figures late in the second half. Furkan Korkmaz only had 13 points. What did you see from Tobias? And we'll go through his numbers this month as well, which may surprise you. But what did you see from Tobias that last night that might have turned your head?
I think first and foremost, it was one of those games where obviously he had advantageous matchups and he went about exploiting those in the right way. So as opposed to pounding the ball and trying to back down smaller defenders time after time, he saw opportunities to drive downhill and to score easy points inside and around the paint, in addition to taking the threes that were open and, as you said, knocking down all of them. Doc Rivers, of course, as is his default with Harris, pointed to him making quicker decisions and then expanded on exactly what he means by that with, I thought, a great quote that was, there's only one ball stopper on this team, right? And of course, that's Joel Embiid. So essentially Harris, though the Sixers need him to be the number 2 scorer, on this current roster, they don't need him to be the number 2 ball stopper because when he doesn't, make quick, decisive moves, it's easier for defenders to get into his body, Rivers said, and he's just a less efficient, less effective overall player. So this was the sort of player the Sixers hope to see moving forward. And the overall trend is good, if not, overwhelmingly encouraging. But the past 4 or 5 games, he's generally played the way the Sixers want him to play and generally put up good numbers. So that was nice here. And I think in this particular game, it was nice to see that, before Embiid checked back in for the final stint, Harris actually ensured the Sixers were up by 2, as opposed to Embiid needing to save the entire day. He did well alongside some second unit guys at playing aggressively without playing slowly, which again is always going to be a key for him on this team.
So, yeah, I mean, when you look at his monthly numbers, there have been a dozen games this month. He's averaging 18.9 points per, about 7 rebounds, around 4 assists, and 1.5 turnovers, shooting 50% from the field with 41% from 3 and 86% from the free throw line. Do you feel like the eye test really reflects those numbers? Do you feel like he's contributing in the way that those numbers might say that he is?
I think it seems about right. I think as far as process and style, last night was certainly his best in recent memory, just at making the most of his physical advantages and doing it in a way that's not deliberate and that is part of the natural flow of the Sixers offense, I think. But I think, as we noted, he was good in the Spurs game too, and that was another game where the Sixers might not pull it out if Tobias Harris doesn't play well. So I think that seems about right. I think for him, it's less about just the pure points, and it's more about how efficiently he's doing that and the ways that he's getting that done. The assist to turnover numbers you pointed to, I think that's encouraging just as far as his decision making, and generally when defenses are shading help in his direction, when he's playing with these bench heavy units, he seems to be doing a little better as of late, just making the smart, simple play. So I think he's trending a little bit in the right direction. Again, not trending in the level of, wow, he's, looking like the all-star-ish player he was last year, but was good last night and has been good as of late.
I mentioned who was out: Danny Green, Seth Curry, Shake Milton, but it was the return of Matisse Thybulle with his heavily taped right shoulder. Matisse, right into the starting lineup, 33 minutes of action. And he doesn't quite have the impact that you would hope that he would have, but just seeing him back and having him as a rotation piece was really important for the Sixers. Alexander Walker poured in 31 points, I believe. Matisse, guarding him most of the night. It was good to see him back out there. Were you surprised, which we've seen in the past when Tyrese Maxey came back from COVID, that Doc had him in for that amount of time and injected him right into the starting lineup, where he had Charlie Brown in that role and maybe could have worked Matisse in a bit slower?
I was not surprised about him starting. That seems to be Rivers' preference in these spots. Just throw the guy back into the fire and see exactly what he has. I do think it's interesting that he seems to manage these situations more by gut feel than you might expect, just given the prevalence of sports science these days.
Right.
And
analytics.
I imagine if this was Joel Embiid, maybe the Sixers would have been a little more cautious, although Embiid also played a lot that double overtime game against the Timberwolves coming back from COVID. So, yeah, Rivers figures the best way to acclimate someone is to test their cardio and to give them a difficult night physically. And Thybulle certainly had that. Rivers admitted, the first half you clearly saw some rust and you didn't see the best version of Matisse Thybulle. And then he flashed some of the renowned defensive tools in the second half.
And that reverse dunk.
Yeah. Had a block and a steal, I think, in quick succession early in the third. Looked a little more just comfortable, I think, offensively with some of the cuts, even if outside of the dunk they weren't actually resulting in points. So just overall makes things a lot easier rotation-wise for the Sixers that they've got Thybulle back. And you figure soon enough he'll look like the Matisse Thybulle we know, even if that wasn't the case, in game one back on the floor.
Here's a thought that is floating out there in Sixers fandom. When we see the prowess and the execution and just the efficiency and Joel Embiid's cardio and the way he's looks to be in such great shape this season, there are people who feel like the load management and slowly working Embiid into extended minutes and things like that from the past years because of the cautiousness with injuries was a mistake because he never quite got into that game shape that he has been showing now. And, just going from his word, he often has said that he feels fine. The foot isn't bothering, the knee, the hand, what have you. Do you feel like there's any validity to that maybe some of that load management from past seasons and not letting him play, back-to-backs or play as often affected his cardio in a way that it isn't being affected this year because those restrictions aren't there?
I don't really think so, in large part because, as Embiid would tell you, a lot of this is on him. Like, he was the one who had to get in better shape so that he was able to play a lot of minutes and not be tired in the fourth quarter and stack a bunch of games in a row. He just wasn't in good enough shape in past seasons for that to be feasible.
Mm-hmm.
I think overall the Sixers have been right to exercise caution with him, and there are times they could have been more cautious. You remember the year that he played in the All-Star game and then comes back from that injury, dealing with a knee issue that sidelined him and that continued to bother him up through the playoffs. So
slightly torn meniscus, I think that was.
I'm not sure what it was classified as. I want to say tendonitis. I don't think he had a meniscus tear or anything, but it did keep him out, I believe, the first 8 games after the All-Star break. And then even in the playoffs against Brooklyn and Toronto for some of these games, he was listed, on the injury report. He missed one of those first-round games against Brooklyn. Anyway, that's an instance where you could argue the Sixers should have load managed him more or should have been a little more cautious in their approach. So I think it's on Embiid's shoulders, and I think now the question is, when's he going to get a day off? Because he's playing so many games in a row.
Right.
And he did acknowledge last night that he's been feeling a little tired, and it's been taking him a little while to sort of get into his groove in games. So I certainly don't think load management as significant as in past years will be necessary, but I imagine one of these days he will get a well-earned night of rest.
It's tough to sit him when he's so hot, though. He's just so on point right now. It's tough to just sit him, and for the Sixers as a team to be able to float what they have without him. So that'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. A game like the Pelicans where they're down four starters would be an optimal time to do that. But once again, Embiid pouring it on against them. We're going to take a time out here and let you stew on some of that. But we'll come back and talk a little bit about this James Harden situation as it relates to the 76ers. We'll be right back here on the Sixers Talk podcast.
Start college, build skills, and complete your degree with Wilmington University. 100% online options and affordable tuition makes WilMU work for you. Learn more at wilmu.edu.
Well, no, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but as it relates to James Harden, supposedly there is, a fly in the ointment, as they say, in Brooklyn, where he's reportedly not feeling thrilled about playing or living in Brooklyn. He has an option to opt out of his current deal at the end of this season, which, according to those reports from The Athletic and ESPN, that there is a chance he could still end up back in Brooklyn if he does opt out and comes to a new terms on a new deal. But once again, the window for the Sixers to maybe step in and bring James Harden to Philadelphia is there if he does opt out. Or there's also, the sign and trade possibility where the Simmons is sent to Brooklyn or Tobias Harris is sent to Brooklyn or some reasonable facsimile thereof, and that brings James Harden to Philadelphia. Would you be comfortable waiting that long on a Simmons trade if you felt, there was some validity to bringing Harden here? And is Harden, you think, the apple of the Sixers' eye?
I think we know Daryl Morey likes James Harden a lot, and there's just been so much smoke here.
Right.
Is every single tidbit of speculation worth blowing up into a huge deal? No, but
hey, that's part of the reason why it's worth talking about every Sixers Talk podcast.
Exactly, but I think the big picture of it's uncertain whether James Harden is going to stay with the Nets beyond this season, and the Sixers like James Harden, and it's not difficult to envision him being a heck of a 1-2 pairing with Joel Embiid. All that's interesting, and all that probably is worth giving consideration to. I think with Harden, the risk would be significant, but that's always the case with a big money player. And I think, as we've maybe touched on once or twice before, part of what's fascinating to me is just the question of how James Harden's game will age. I think, in theory, his savviness and the fact that he doesn't rely much on his athleticism will be assets. But hey, 33-year-old player, it's rare that those guys are elite in the NBA. I guess it's maybe becoming a little more common if you want to read into Steph Curry's success, or you really want to hyperanalyze, individual examples. But you think of the average NBA player's career arc, and it sure starts going down around 32, 33 years old. But Joel Embiid is indisputably in his prime, and he would absolutely be getting a heck of a second star in James Harden if the Sixers manage to pull that off. For me, I just find it hard to see, if Brooklyn wins the title this season, that James Harden wouldn't want to stay on that team, even if, the reporting is true that he doesn't love the living arrangements or the weather or whatever in Brooklyn. He's on a championship team. I imagine you want to stay on a championship team, but certainly there will be a lot of speculation moving forward about his mindset and his desires for the future. I think each player, of course, has their own preferences, but you just take generic NBA player and ask, do you want to play with Joel Embiid? The answer is probably going to be yes. And I think that is one reason that all of this buzz, which does seem to be recently escalating, is worth paying attention to.
And of course, we have the anomaly of all anomalies when it comes to age. LeBron James coming into South Philly on Thursday, 37-year-old, playing some of his best basketball, trying to lead this Lakers team to a title. I think the other question, which I posed to you, was, is the Simmons for Harden trade, is that amicable for you? Do you feel like that's a trade that where the Sixers win? Of course, there's what James Harden brings as a player, but I think the age thing just really gives me a little bit of pause, because you got a 25-year-old three-time All-Star that you're trading for a 33-year-old player. Same goes for Damian Lillard. These are guys over 30, where Simmons is a guy who you could see playing at least another 10 seasons. Maybe he has that longevity because of the way his style of play is, like a LeBron James, where he can push it past 35 years old. But a guy like Simmons, for someone who's 30 plus, just kind of gives me a little bit of pause, is a little, a little bit upsetting for me. Where are you at on that?
Yeah, I'm with you. Just in that I think the immediate reaction of, if the Sixers land James Harden, fans are right to be ecstatic about that. That's fair, but then I think the
practicality of it, right?
Yeah, the second reaction of, geez, there's so much risk here, and it's not a sure thing. I think that's also really fair and really valid. And the Harden stuff is complicated, of course, in part because of his contract situation. Like, this is not the typical sign and trade sort of deal. You think of the Jimmy Butler, Josh Richardson sign and trade. It's not typical with a sign and trade that you have to give a lot up. And obviously Ben Simmons, I think it's fair to classify him as a lot. But then again, that's a scenario down the road where the Sixers have held on to Simmons for a year and would sure like to move on from him at some point. So I think there's a lot of complexity to analyzing like how the Sixers would do in that deal. And as with all of this, it's hard to know for sure. And a lot of it just boils down to how long is James Harden going to be a really good player for? And I think he's going to be good for quite a while, as long as he's healthy, is my gut feel. But it's really hard to tell. And yeah, to your question of, does the Harden possibility like justify waiting for the Sixers? I think you do again have to have knowledge of exactly what's on the table for the Sixers pre-deadline, but it sure doesn't seem like a star is, and James Harden is a star. So I think it's defensible logic that waiting it out and putting your chips into the Harden basket makes some sense.
Well, we're almost 15 days now, if we start from today until the deadline comes February 10th. So, hey, we'll see how this plays out, because the Sixers hopefully will be getting healthier here as this week in the homestand progresses, as Shake Milton, Danny Green, and Seth Curry can get back into the lineup, and then pushing toward the trade deadline, you'll see where the pieces would fit that they could acquire if they do decide to make a move. But Joel Embiid is doing his part, and you as Sixers fans are doing yours, and being passionate, opinionated, and intense about this team that so many of us love and enjoy so much. Hey, for Noah Levick and Ben Berry, I'm Danny Pommells. Thanks for listening to the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University, Wilm U Works. We'll see you next time.